Superheroes shoot everyone!
Rick and Morty Season 6. Rick and Morty 100 years. Who cares anymore? Oh, at least that's how it currently feels, with the overall poor reputation this show currently has, and the various elements of drama that have occurred behind the scenes, with co-creator Justin Roiland having been fired from the show, and the characters of Rick and Morty, the title characters, being recast going forward. Honestly, very curious as to what will become of this show. As for Season 6, it's great to have the Blu-ray release. This is yet another Steelbook similar to what we had with the Season 5 release, albeit the artwork for this one is very simplistic in comparison, but it's great to see the extended Smith family all together. But when it comes down to the episodes, there were a couple that I genuinely really did like. The rest ranged from very mediocre to outright terrible. And so I'm hopeful that revisiting these episodes, I will perhaps gain a greater appreciation for some of them, but I know for a fact that I will be skipping through a couple of episodes on here, if not skipping over them entirely, and I'll be sure to make my thoughts and opinions very clear on those episodes in particular. Looking at the Blu-ray set in itself, overall we have what is really to be expected from the Rick and Morty Blu-rays from what we have had previously. The same thing more or less does carry over, where we have all 10 episodes included. Runtime is approximately 222 minutes, rated a 15 here in the UK for very strong language, strong bloody violence, references to sex and drugs. And there are thankfully some bonus inclusions on here as well. We have all of the Inside the Episode features, which are basically little 2 to 3 minute shorts, usually uploaded to the Adult Swim YouTube channel, roughly about a day after each individual episode has aired, and they always give a fruitful kind of insight as to what the writers and directors, I guess, wanted to accomplish from each individual episode, which can sometimes change your mind on certain episodes, but really, to be honest, I've been very firm on my opinions with what we have gotten content-wise from this season, which I'll delve into in this review. One thing that I am thankful for is that there is an exclusive Blu-ray feature on here, and that is the Inside Season 6, which is roughly about 10 minutes worth of content, offering some interviews with the staff involved on the production of Rick and Morty Season 6 and what the intended arc really was for this season overall. And then we also have, looking at the intricacies of certain episodes, the anatomy of a scene, looking at 3 episodes in particular, that being Bethic Twinstinct, Night Family, and Analyze Piss. And here's a look at the Steelbook outside of the shrink wrap, giving you a better look there at the artwork. These little 15 logos are thankfully stickers, which I'll peel off later on. There's the spine, Rick and Morty Season 6, and then at the back there, Smith Family C-130... Is it C-137? Makes you wonder. Anyway, inside artwork. Here's a look at the inside. We do thankfully have, which I'm very surprised about the inclusion of, a little slip of the front cover artwork, but on the back we have a list of all the episodes that are included, and the bonus features listed as well, which is a really nice touch, so I do appreciate that. As far as inside artwork goes, I do love this little look there from the Night Family episode. However, sadly, blank disc yet again, no disc artwork for this one, and no artwork beneath that disc either, which is meh. Trying to stay positive, folks. But anyway, let's go through the episodes and detail my thoughts on them. Going through the list of episodes, first up we have Solaricks, where after evil Morty broke away from the central finite curve in the Season 5 finale, Rick is forced to reset the multiverse with the portal gun now rendered useless. And this reset is overall a great idea, which involves every multiverse traveler going back to their original dimensions, which is obviously bad news for the characters, especially Morty, who once again ends up visiting the Cronenberg world from Season 1. And weirdly, the Jerry that we follow in the C-137 universe ends up resetting as well, and this was a very fun throwback in my opinion to the Season 2 episode where Jerry ends up at a Jerry daycare, where ultimately Rick and Morty take the wrong one with them. And this episode sets up the main villain for this season, and I'm gonna guess the next few story arcs going forward, now being Rick Prime, with evil Morty obviously no longer in the picture. We've seen hints of Rick Prime and the origin story of the Rick that we follow for a handful of episodes, but nothing really overt. when it comes down to any specific details, and this is where this episode comes in, where Rick Prime is now hunting at C-137, and I'm intrigued to see where this goes, since we literally know nothing about this incarnation of Rick. And with this episode's ending, I was kind of intrigued by the original Jerry being the last survivor of the Cronenberg world, who could have maybe teamed up with Rick Prime. Instead, he gets killed. Wasted opportunity, but otherwise, this was a pretty fair opening episode to the 6th season. Next up is Rick, A Mort Well Lived, which I have a feeling this plot is going to be revisited at some point, hopefully bearing some form of significance to Morty going forward. And when visiting the Blitz and Chits arcade, Morty ends up stuck inside the Roy video game. His mind is literally split across billions of video game NPCs. And so it's up to Rick to enter the game as Roy and retrieve Morty's mind by convincing the NPCs to come together. And I really like the religious connotations, looking at how the NPCs reject their original lives and how they become part of something much larger, that of course being Morty. And whilst Rick is trying to save Morty from within the game, the arcade is under attack, where Summer is instructed to do a Die Hard, despite not having seen the movie, and take out these terrorists. And I really appreciate the scope of this episode and how much effort went into the unique character designs and locations in particular. It's a shame this level of quality in writing is not kept consistent throughout the entire show, but there's so much to appreciate, and I love the attention to detail and the art styles that are chosen. Bethic Twinstinct is a very much mixed bag for me personally, and once again, the show returns to a very juvenile level of writing, with various incest ideas similar to the giant space baby from Season 5. Kind of. Beth and Space Beth, as she's often referred to, end up sleeping with one another, and it is played for laughs at first, with many scenes showing just how uncomfortable this makes the other characters feel, and understandably so, where I honestly didn't find this to be that funny. When the same joke has been exhausted several times, the writing really does take a turn, looking at the relationship between Beth and Jerry and how Space Beth fits into this equation, and it's really weird to see Jerry suddenly become relaxed about his wife cheating on him with herself, and how he decides to take ownership of this situation, basically allowing it to happen just to prove a point. And this somehow makes himself into a more appealing husband and, I guess, manly figure. And I can appreciate this episode trying to focus on Beth and self-discovery, both figuratively, deconstructing herself, and literally in the other sense. But this episode really just felt very messy and didn't work for me at all. Night Family is an inventive episode that carefully utilized a variety of horror tropes. I've always been a big fan of plot threads that involve kind of a split psyche to some description, and this time we have Rick introducing alien tech to the Smith family, allowing them to be productive during their sleeping hours. For example, when asleep, Rick and Morty start getting into shape and keep the benefits when awake, and this works great for the whole family, until the Night Family starts to question what they get out of this arrangement. And I love the zombie-like approach to the Night Family and how Summer is written to be the leader amongst them. Some very clever ideas and really quirky animation during the fight scenes in particular. Final de-smithation is another mixed bag for me, where I've mentioned before in my other Rick and Morty reviews that the Rick and Jerry plots are some of my personal favourites. Their awkward character chemistry from being polar opposites makes for some really excellent writing, in particular when we see Jerry pushed out of his comfort zone. And joining Rick on an infiltration mission about fortune cookies, there's a really great conspiracy theory element that heavily involves Jerry. How, you may ask? Well, he receives a fortune cookie stating he is going to have intercourse with his own mother. Yup, here we go yet again with more incest bullshit.
This needs to stop now!
Fortune cookies in this episode are written to be a matter of fact, which is bad news for Jerry, where they both attempt to stop this fortune from happening, and I think the writers can do so much better than this sort of juvenile attempts at comedy. There's some really great ideas written into this episode, especially creatively.
I am the Son of God!
The visuals, the spy espionage related content, but the rest of it feels very beneath the level of what great writing can accomplish on this show. This next episode I actually had a lot of fun with, and that is Juricksic Mort. which seems to challenge Rick's capabilities, where dinosaurs were in fact not wiped out, but left planet Earth only to return and find humanity as the dominant species. And rather than taking over with hostile intentions, they just assume control of the planet peacefully, with humanity just taking a back seat. And I love how this annoys Rick, where he wants to prove a point that he is the most powerful human being around and that he is on their level, but these sentient dinosaurs just aren't fazed by him. They don't care about what he has to say. Whatever he does, it's beneath them, causing more friction between these characters. And I really enjoyed the music used throughout this episode. I believe one song received sort of an official kind of release called Jesus Was a Dinosaur, but I was a huge fan of the dinosaur naming song used in the episode, which then had the lyrics altered for a much more comedic tone, including my favourite line, "Fuck off and die, no saws."
Fuck off and die, the sores.
I believe Ryan Elder composed this with the very soothing vocals provided by artist Katomi. I would love an official release of this track, but ultimately I doubt that will ever happen. Full Meta Jackrick is where the show took a short break during the airing for a few weeks, returning with a strange cold opener that continued into the opening credits. And capitalizing on meta humor, this episode went all in, with many creative ideas making for quite a convoluted story. One highlight for me was the character designs relating to puns and story concepts. For example, the character Rick and Morty chase throughout the opening is called Previous Leon. Previous Leon. That's the level we're on now, not to say that's really a bad thing. But if you enjoyed the Story Train episode from Season 4, you'll really appreciate this follow-up. Storylord makes a return, which was interesting at first, but he felt deliberately watered down for a villain. He learns as a character who his creator is and his purpose being to find motivation, and I like how a fictional character is needing something to strive for in this realm of storytelling. And if this was the whole purpose behind the character, I can kind of respect the idea and how he would seemingly need to be watered down in order to find some form of purpose. And when he exists in the real world, this is where he is ultimately not the powerful being that he is within the boundaries of storytelling. And speaking of which, there is a lot of story inspired by Dan Harmon's influences, such as American writer Joseph Campbell, who inspired the Harmon Story Circle, which again, with these personal references, I do love these and how this is something that we have previously seen, again in the Story Train episode. But this made for overall a very well-layered meta story, which didn't really feel as though it was done deliberately for the purposes of just being meta. It felt like a middle finger, in some ways, to some literary theories and ideas, such as the death of the author, birth of the reader as an example, just openly looking at the creators of fiction objectively. Analyze Piss was genuinely my favourite episode of this season, and may even be top 10 episode material, where Rick confronts why he is always being targeted by sort of zany cartoony villains, including the Pissmaster, and rather than stepping up to fight him, he instead ignores him, where Jerry fights the Pissmaster instead for a viral video, and he ends up becoming an Avengers-level superhero. And so, with Rick unable to leave things alone, there's a lot of emotional conflict for him in particular, where he finds out that the Pissmaster committed suicide due to becoming a laughingstock. And trying to make things right, Rick takes on the villain alias and changes people's perception of Pissmaster, making him a hero instead. And this was an excellent deep dive into both characters and how Rick's perception changes by ending up in the shoes of his enemy. Going from one of the best episodes of the show, we go to arguably one of the absolute worst episodes in my honest opinion, and that is a Rickin King Mortar's Morts. It recycles themes and ideas such as challenging faith and a man's belief in something unnecessary, with a punchline borrowed from the Vat of Acid episode, and this was a Morty-specific story, almost teaching him a lesson where he disbands a cult known as the Knights of the Sun, claiming their rituals and beliefs, such as cutting off their own dicks to join, are ultimately pointless, and elements to this are kinda funny, with the Morty focus and how he diminishes an entire society using just general knowledge. Ironically, the Knights do actually serve a purpose, keeping the solar system in check, which erupts into chaos once they disband. But I just wasn't really feeling this episode at all. It felt like a lot of the ideas behind it were very forced. I did like the medieval concepts, and I must admit, the ending did get me, but that was only for it calling back to the Vat of Acid episode, which is purely a better episode of the show. Otherwise, this was a fairly bland story with very little original humour from the show. And last up we have Ricktional Mortcoons, Rickmas Mortcation. Honestly, I found this to be a really poor finale. Morty receives a lightsaber for Christmas, and accidentally drops it vertically, where if it hits the Earth's core, this will destroy the planet. A lot of the gags are repetitive, and I usually really like the chemistry between the President character voiced amazingly by Keith David, and how he puts up with Rick and Morty. His usage in this episode, however, was nothing really exciting, or vaguely amusing this time, other than a few forced kind of Star Wars references, no pun intended. And I wasn't a fan of the big twist for this season either. Rick created a robotic replica of himself, which was the version of Rick we apparently saw throughout the majority of this season, where real Rick was instead experimenting and plotting his revenge on Rick Prime, which is supposedly where Season 7 is going to take us. Overall, looking at this season collectively, this was a pretty meh run of episodes. Some mild improvements compared to Season 5, but I found a lot of what I didn't really like about Season 5 just carried straight over into Season 6. But that's not to say the entirety of this season is terrible. Again, similar to Season 5, I would say it's kind of split down the middle evenly, half and half. Some highlights are definitely Analyze Piss. I think that's one of the best episodes of the show in recent years. The Roy episode is one of the most ambitious, with so much great talent in terms of the illustrations, the unique character designs, and the backgrounds, just the depth of detail, and the animation throughout that episode is absolutely flawless. And speaking of which, I think that is definitely one of the most consistent elements of Rick and Morty, that being the visual style. I really do appreciate how they make everything so unique and really do add a lot of attention to detail in some aspects that you really wouldn't think too much about, but make rewatching the show all the more enjoyable. And in terms of story concepts, I think Night Family was definitely one of the more respectable highlights of this season. That's going to do it for my review looking at Rick and Morty Season 6. I hope you did enjoy. If you did, be sure to leave me a like down below. Let me know your thoughts and opinions on this season in the comments. Do you perhaps have a favourite episode? It's always great to engage with you folks and listen to your thoughts and opinions as well. And for more content, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, DVD Review Studios.
Are you threatening me?